Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the session focused on data sharing. As you join us, please feel free to drop a few data points in the chat window. If you can share your name, what organization you're joining from, and also what you hope to get out of this session. And we'll get started in about a minute, just to let few additional people join the session. Okay, so since we have a packed agenda for this session, we'll get started. Welcome. I'm Leila Toplik. I'm with NetHope, where I lead the Emerging Technologies Initiative. And for those of you who might not be familiar with NetHope, NetHope is a nonprofit technology consortium of 63 global NGOs who are actually represented in this session. And we work very closely with 50+ different partners and supporters around the world. Again, as we get started, it would be great to hear from you. So let us know your name, organization you're joining from, and again, what you hope to get out of this session or maybe contribute to the discussion. We do want to keep this interactive. In fact, to kick us off, we'll start with the first poll. We have a couple of polls prepared for you, just mostly to understand who is in this virtual room. So if we can go to the first poll, what we'd love to hear from you about is if your organization is already engaged in data sharing with external stakeholders, any external stakeholder. So yes, no, or maybe I don't know. So we'll give this about another 20 seconds just to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to share this. Great, the majority are engaged in external data sharing. Okay, so let's close the poll and share it with everybody. So hopefully everybody can see the results. So again, majority is engaged in data sharing, so it'd be also great to hear from you throughout the session, your experience with data sharing, especially as we talk about examples, advantages, disadvantages, some of the enablers, and then what we can expect in the near future. Excellent. So I'm going to go to the next slide. We can stop sharing the poll. Great. And if you just, again, if you've just joined us, please let us know. And the poll is still showing. Can you still see the poll on my screen? Yeah. So Tonya, maybe if you can help remove the poll. Let me see. Okay, I'll do it. Great. Okay, so this session is about data, and as you've heard throughout this conference, because this is day 3 of the conference, data is really central to the work that we do in the international development sector to support individuals and communities in need. Data enables us to respond in a more timely manner, in a more relevant and a more sustainable way. And there's a lot of data. Every day, 2.5 quintillion bytes of data is generated globally. In fact, according to IDC, the data created over the next 3 years will be more than data created over the past 3 decades. Now, this growing importance of data in our work, some of that is driven by the growing societal and environmental problems, as well as the rise of some of these data-dependent technologies like AI have created a demand for data sharing. I just want to share something from our sector. Specifically, since launching in 2014, Humanitarian Data Exchange, or known as HDX, has grown over 2,000% from 800 data sets to over 18,000 data sets that are accessed annually by over 1.3 million people worldwide. Now, sharing data across organizations and also stakeholders has many advantages. as data from different sources is combined, it offers new insights that could guide a more coherent and more relevant action. We'll talk about both advantages as well as disadvantages and risks throughout this session. For now, what I want to leave you with is a prediction from Gartner that is relevant for this discussion. Gartner predicts that by next year, so that's 2023, organizations that promote data sharing will outperform their peers in those business value metrics. Sure, this is to some extent specific to the industry, but I think one interesting point for all of us to consider is that this requires fostering a data sharing culture, not a data ownership culture. And again, we'll talk a bit about that in this session. So if we can actually launch the second poll, what we'd love to hear from you about is if your organization has a culture of data sharing. So yes, no, or maybe limited. So we'll give you a few seconds to share that with us. Okay. Now over 70% of you, it seems like, has shared this. So let's end the poll. So it looks like, again, majority of you have a culture of data sharing. So again, it would be great to hear from you throughout this session about what is enabling this culture of data sharing, including processes, practices, and incentives. So here's what we'll discuss in this session. This topic of data sharing is very broad, and there are many different ways to approach it. What I wanted to do, especially with the brilliant group of practitioners that we have brought together here today, is first to ground our discussion around data sharing in practice. So specifically, different practical examples of data collaborations between public, private, and non-governmental organizations, as well as communities. So you'll hear that first. Then we'll obviously talk about some of the advantages, disadvantages, and risks, and really also spend some time on enablers of both responsible and impactful data sharing, and then just look ahead, what's coming in the next 5 years, and what do we need to put in place in order to enable, again, responsible, impactful, and sustainable data sharing. So with that, what we'll do next is actually go through some of these practical examples where you can understand what are some of the problems that are being solved through data sharing, who are some of the key stakeholders, and then what are we learning from data sharing, what's working, what's not working. So let me just quickly introduce the panelists, and they'll also have the opportunity to tell you more about their work. After this, just so you know, we'll go into a couple of prepared questions, but we really ask you to share your questions, share your examples throughout the session, and we'll leave plenty of time for the discussion at the end. So the first panelist is Shreya Agarwal, who is joining us from San Francisco, where it's, what, 5:30 in the morning. So thank you, Shreya. Shreya is with Digital Green. She'll tell you more about the work that Digital Green does. Immaculata Mwanja is joining us from Rwanda. She is with Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. Joseph Oliveros is with IFRC, based here in Switzerland, where I am. Caitlin Augustin is with DataKind. She's on the East Coast in Florida. And then Stefan Verhulst is with the Governance Laboratory, or the GovLab, at the New York University, joining us from New York. So I'll first turn over to Shreya to talk about a specific practical example from Digital Green. Shreya, over to you.
Thank you so much, Leela. It's wonderful to be with all of you. As Leela mentioned, I work with an organization called Digital Green. Digital Green is a nonprofit organization where we work with over 3 million small-scale farmers, especially in India and Ethiopia, by helping them use data and technology to prosper. Now, as you can imagine, working in geographies like India and Ethiopia, we have very different tech infrastructure, digital literacy, and availability of quality digitized data. The farmers that we work with often don't have the means to make data-driven decisions, be it what services to choose or what practices to follow, which impacts their productivity and income. And at an institutional level, when quality data actually exists, it remains in silos where organizations don't really have an incentive to share it with one another, and definitely not with the farmers who the data is about. So we've been mainly working with addressing two challenges. One is how to incentivize this data sharing between organizations on their own terms. And the other is to find ways for farmers to have control over their own data. So I'll go into an example. We've been working with the Ministry of Agriculture in Ethiopia. So first, we've supported them in developing a farmer registry so that they have good quality digitized data with data points like plot size, location, crops, and crop yield. And we're supporting the government share this data with third-party organizations like CIAT that offer a fertilizer estimation model based on soil parameters. And matching this farmer data with this input model to inform precise input requirements and natural resource management practices helps farmers make better decisions that support their resilience over the long term. So in order to make this work, we've developed and continue to develop two tools. The first is called FarmStack, which is an open source protocol, and it's in the resource tab that you will see for this session, which has peer-to-peer connectors and a codified usage policy so that organizations can actually define exactly what data they would like to share, how it can be used for what duration, without having to go through a centralized database or a third party like Digital Green. And then the second tool that we've been developing is a consent manager so that farmers can give and take back consent and eventually via a data wallet, get copies of their data so that they can directly share it with others. So finally, if there's anything that I'd suggest taking away from this presentation, it would be a belief that people need to have the means to own and control their own data. And as an organization, we hope that we can support this whole development ecosystem move in this direction. So with that, I'll pause and I think hand over to Ima.
That's right. Thanks so much, Shreya, for sharing the example from Digital Green. Just also a reminder for everyone, as you've come in through the session landing page, we've also posted a lot of resources on the session landing page. So that might be referenced in this discussion. Ima, could you share the specific example from HOT?
Thank you very much, Lila. So hi everyone. For those who do not know HOT, HOT is an international organization that is dedicated to humanitarian action and community development through open mapping. And we mainly focus on disaster services and building open source tools. But for today, I'm going to mainly focus on one example of a project that I worked on in Dar es Salaam. I'm actually a Tanzanian, but right now I'm based in Rwanda. So we worked in Dar es Salaam, which was focusing on making the city more flood resilient. So Dar es Salaam is the most developed city in Tanzania and is continuing to develop, but it is very affected by floods. In every rain that occurs, there's always floods. So HOT, together with the World Bank and other stakeholders, started the Ramani Huria project in order to determine what were the causes of the floods and how we can make the city more flood resilient. So in order to do this, we first started by collecting data, which is where HOT was mainly involved, collecting data for, let's say, drainages or stormwater drainage systems, or assets or amenities that are mainly affected by floods, just to generally understand why these areas are being affected. And while collecting those data, we kept on realizing or finding out other causes of the flooding, which included poor solid waste management, or the soil system in Dar es Salaam was also pretty bad. So we collected all of this data, provided it to the World Bank. But one special thing that we did in the collection of data, it wasn't just experts that were going in to collect the data. We involved the community members of the areas because they actually understand their neighborhoods best. So they were the ones that were telling us, this is the place that is flooding. This is the reason we think why it's flooding. So we were incorporating their views and our views as experts in order to find out what would be the best way to overcome the flood. So at the end of the day, we created different maps that showed how, let's say, which areas were being affected by floods, and these maps were shared back to the communities to show them the areas that were affected, so that at the end, when they, for example, go to the local governments or the city council, they can have something that they can showcase to tell them, okay, this area is the one that is being affected by flood, and this is what I think we should do. So then it's even easier for them to get the resources that they need in order to, let's say, make the storm water drainage systems better. Thank you, Leila.
Thanks, Ima. Thanks for highlighting the role of the community in both in data collection and data sharing. Joseph, IFRC has a number of programs and projects that depend on data, including data sharing. Can you share with us one of the examples?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you so much, Leila. It's a pleasure to join this panel today. IFRC is a membership organization comprised of 192 national Red Cross and Red Crescent societies worldwide. And as a federation, we are committed to scaling up cash and voucher assistance to assist the most vulnerable affected by disasters and crises, providing them with dignity and choice. We have a very ambitious target of providing 50% of our humanitarian assistance using cash and vouchers by 2025. And to enable this scale up, working with various stakeholders and sharing information will be definitely necessary. So some of the stakeholders that we work with are, one, the financial service providers to effectuate the distribution of money to aid recipients. Second is that we have the governments, where in some cases we leverage their data to triangulate targeting or inclusion criteria. And we also have programs that are linked to social protection that is using government data, for instance. And third, we have humanitarian organizations where we work to coordinate and where we also partner in delivering aid. Also, to measure our performance, we also need to share and analyze data within our own membership. We embark on an annual mapping of data shared by members, which includes countries that implemented cash interventions, how much cash was provided, and how many were assisted. This collective mapping, we call this as counting cash, has been very helpful in donor advocacy and operational planning. And in terms of lessons learned, we observed that some of the forms of data sharing take longer to establish than others. And this depends sometimes on the type of data being shared. Is it data of beneficiaries? Is it assessments, program data? What's the purpose of the sharing? Are partners able to see the value? Is it easy to share the data? Do they even have the capacity to collect and collate such data? I'd like to think that the success of our cash and voucher programs will need to go beyond the efforts of a single organization, because we will always have limited resources. And it's in working with partners sharing data responsibly in one form or another that gives us an opportunity to achieve scale, increase efficiencies, improve our work, and more importantly, effectively reach those who are in need.
Thanks, Joseph. And we'll come back to some of the topics that you highlighted here later in the discussion. Also, just a reminder for everyone to, in addition to doing the introductions in the chat window, it's wonderful to see just the diversity represented here. Also, let us know if you have any questions, and as well as any examples or lessons learned as you're hearing from the panelists. Now I'll turn over to Caitlin Augustin from DataKind to talk to us about one of the many examples of data sharing that DataKind has been involved in. Caitlin.
Sure, thanks so much, Leila. And it's great to be here today and to see so many people engaged in the conversation already. DataKind, we are a global nonprofit focused on using data science, machine learning, and AI in the service of humanity. As a service delivery organization, we partner with social impact organizations to help them make sense of their data, help them build tools that allow them to use their data to drive decision-making in a more effective way, to help with using constrained resources to do as much good in the world as possible. So we are only successful because of data sharing. As an organization who works in support of others, we need strong data sharing from our partner organizations to allow us to have that data to be able to build those solutions to deliver those insights. We don't generate the data for these tools ourselves. And an example I'd like to share with you is a project that's been ongoing for about 2 years now, where DataKind's been working with the organization New America, which is a United States think tank that works nationwide in the US. And the New America Future of Land and Housing program came to us in 2019 and said, we work in housing and we realize that we don't know how many people are losing their homes and where they're losing them. So in the United States, it's known that millions of households lose their homes, but there's almost nothing that's known about where that housing loss is most acute. And because that's because the mechanisms of measuring housing loss, which are eviction records and foreclosure records, those are actually very siloed data sets that are often held at the sort of smallest level of government, so at the city or county level of government. And there's not a national standard for that data standardization, that data collection, that data repository. And in our process, so we said, we want to help you understand where housing loss is happening so that you can provide recommendations to your government partners for how to direct emergency rental assistance. Now, we started this program pre-pandemic, but it took on a real urgency during the pandemic, and the insights were really sort of urgently requested and rapidly used to distribute large amounts of funding in rental assistance to keep more individuals in their homes. And what we found was we had to bring together data providers across every level of government. We had to bring together nonprofit organizations. So realizing that every person held a component of it, from the local legal assistance programs holding some amount of the eviction filings, county clerks holding some of that information, being able to purchase that data from large retailer organizations, so private data holders also being a part of that. And we were able to build a full picture of eviction and foreclosure in the United States and realize that only 2/3 of the United States actually has visible data on this housing loss. So by being able to bring together all of these data streams and make sense of it, we're able to expose these huge gaps and then help to derive recommendations there. In terms of sort of the outcomes of this, one thing we did learn was that it's unsustainable for one champion, as great as a champion like New America is, to be that galvanizing force to get people to share data. You can't rely on one person. And so a solution DataKind has worked on is to not just be the one who must do this data analysis ourselves, but to build the tools that would allow any data holder to do the analysis on their own. And so that removes the data sharing and the data holder as the sort of one of the stumbling blocks to these solutions. And we also just realized that we needed to align our work with other incentives. So when our partners had a real incentive to distribute funds as quickly as possible, by providing the most digestible pieces of information, our work was aligned with theirs, and it got a lot more buy-in for the data sharing process and the demonstration of results.
Great, this is great. Thanks so much, Caitlin, and thanks for highlighting both tools and incentives that are enablers of responsible and impactful data sharing. Again, we'll come back to that a bit later in the session. And then finally, Stefan, the GovLab has done a lot of work and a lot of research in this space. If for those of you who have access to Pathable right now, take a look at a great repository of resources that Stefan has curated for you. Stefan, do share with us one of the many examples of data sharing.
Sure. Thanks, Leila, and thanks for having me on this illustrious panel. I already learned a lot myself just by listening to the panelists here. So yeah, I'm Stefan Verhulst. I'm the co-founder of GovLab. And for those who don't know GovLab, we are an action research center based here in New York, and our mission is to transform the way we make decisions in the public interest using emerging and new technologies. And of course, one of them involves data, where we've done a lot of work on trying to unlock data for decision making. And one of the specific areas that we have focused on is unlocking privately held data for public interest decision making. And obviously, there are many examples because we work across sectors and across regions, but I do want to highlight the importance of the pandemic in actually accelerating a few of those data collaboratives, meaning at the beginning of the pandemic 2 years ago, we saw an increased interest in actually having public-private partnerships being established, especially to inform so-called non-pharmaceutical decisions, because at the beginning of the pandemic, we were basically reliant on the non-pharmaceutical kind of interventions, such as social distancing, which of course is still present. But also, anyway, do we need to wear a mask? Do we not need to wear the mask? And who ultimately decides and informs the opinion with regard to what is important? And so within that context, we've set up and worked with a whole range of organizations to develop new kinds of public-private partnerships, especially around two types of data. One is, of course, mobility data, which is a broad group which involves cell phone data, but it also involves, for instance, GPS data, and it also involves, for instance, software development kit data, i.e. if you have a cell phone, then there is also a geolocation tracking quite often attached with the software or the app that you are using. And so we worked with many of corporations, ranging from Telefonica to Cubic, for instance, to anyway, a range of other organizations to set up those kinds of data collaboratives with public health officials in order to understand, for instance, movements within their city, such as, for instance, New York City, but also, anyway, cities across the world, in order to understand whether actually people are complying with, for instance, home lockdown kind of considerations and interventions, and if not, what would be a better way to actually go about nudging certain kinds of compliance. And so that's one kind of group. The other group of data collaboratives that we were involved with was through our Data for COVID-19 Challenge, which we set up together with Agence France de Développement and Expertise France, where we try to support data collaboratives in Africa in order to use alternative data sets and innovative data mechanisms in order to indeed inform the pandemic. And many of those data collaboratives use social media data and do sentiment analysis in order to understand who are the opinion leaders and to what extent can we prevent misinformation and disinformation as it relates to, for instance, vaccinations, or as it, for instance, wearing or not wearing a mask. And so these are just two areas. We also done a lot of research on what worked, what did not work, which indeed, Leila, are in the links. But I think very briefly, there are at least three challenges that I think you may want to pick up in the next part of this conversation, Leila. One is obviously governance. I think there is still a lot of transaction cost and concern in actually setting up data collaboratives, because we haven't really made much progress on clarifying how one can govern a data collaborative in a responsible and sustainable and systematic way. And that ranges from confusion about what are the rules within a particular kind of region. At the beginning, for instance, in Europe, everyone thought that accessing cell phone data was illegal under GDPR, till of course the European Data Protection Supervisor basically clarified what could be done under GDPR. And that's only in Europe. In the rest of the world, there was even more confusion on what can and cannot happen with regard to accessing privately held data. But it also relates to absence of common data sharing agreements, to even, anyway, absence of any decision-making processes that are legitimate as it relates to accessing those kinds of data. Which leads me to the second challenge, which, anyway, your question was about culture. But it's not only about having a data culture within organizations, it's actually having a dedicated function within organizations that are mandated for data sharing. I mean, many people ask and knock on our door and say, who should we talk to in corporation X with regard to their data? And most of the time, Leila, I have to say, good luck finding out. There is no profession, no dedicated individual or team quite often that is mandated to provide access to their data. And as a result, massive transaction costs to actually identify who do you talk to. And then lastly, coming back to many of the discussions that and many of the interventions already heard, because we are talking about reusing data that was collected for one purpose, and now we're going to use it for another purpose, which, by the way, is the value proposition, but also the concern at the same time. We actually do need to get a social license for doing this that goes beyond quite often consent or flawed kind of consent mechanisms. And so we do need to find a new way of acquiring that social license through, for instance, citizens' assemblies, one that we've set up here in New York, to inform that kind of reuse of data. And we have not seen the scaling of those kinds of engagements that match the scaling of data collaborations as well.
Great, thanks so much, Stefan. And also just teeing up some of the discussion that we want to have around enablers, including the governance and dedicated position around driving data sharing. So we're going to transition into a couple of questions, but I also want to encourage everyone that's participating in this session to, one, share with us what's resonating, what you're finding interesting and potentially new. And then second, share the questions and any other examples and lessons learned that you might have had, as many of you have indicated that you've been engaged in data sharing. So just to quickly, more as a summary, I want to turn to a couple of you to quickly highlight some of the key advantages, but also disadvantages, including risks related to data sharing. So if I may, maybe call on you, Shreya, and then Ima, and come back to you, Stefan.
Thanks, Leila. So as I was mentioning, and thank you for all the panelists for their presentations, one of the biggest advantages of data sharing is that the end users often can get greater choice in terms of services and practices. And in the example that I was providing, just by, for example, linking farmer data and their location with that of weather and soil, you're able to ensure that the kinds of services you're getting are actually targeted and tailored versus the generic services that that users often get, just because we don't have that ability to share data across organizations. At an institutional and an organizational level, the amount of cost that is needed to replicate data for the same from the same source leads to just inefficient systems. So that's another great advantage of actually ensuring a good collaborative data sharing system. And then finally, to the point about having users actually control their data, by enabling means for them to have access to the data, it not only provides insights that can support decision making, so for people to know exactly and have transparency of what people are collecting data for, and also share that data so that it's unlocking completely new systems. Like, for example, in the credit space, if I know how much of, if I know, for example, the revenue and the expense data that's being collected by other organizations, and I can share it with other banking institutions, I can unlock credit. So just to say that there's significant advantages to data sharing, both at a user and an institutional level. Let me pause there.
Great, thanks so much, Shreya. So leveling the playing field, and some of that comes from through transparency, cost and time, and local empowerment are some of the advantages. Ima and Stefan, as I turn to you, I'd also love to hear some of the disadvantages or risks that we need to address. There's a question also in the chat window related to a risk. So Ima, your thoughts just based on the work that you're doing with HOT.
Yeah, thank you very much, Leila. And actually what I wanted to talk about here, Shreya has also mentioned it, it's about transparency in terms of advantages. It's transparency. And in this is like, we're empowering communities through, greater transparency, because HOT uses OpenStreetMap which is a tool, or we call it a Wikipedia of map, because anyone can edit or add data in there, and it's free to access. You can share it and it's available to anyone. And so the advantage to this is that anyone in the society, in the community, whether they're rich or poor, has the ability to have this data. It's advantageous to, let's say, when Joseph was speaking about the Red Cross. We have even worked with the Red Cross before in providing the open data to them in the first responders that they do. So yeah, the major thing that I wanted to highlight as the advantage is the ability for anyone to be able to access the data that is being collected anytime and anywhere. And in terms of disadvantages, so the data that is being collected, as I said, it can be, let's say, the data that is being added to OpenStreetMap can be added by anyone at any time. So there is an issue of data quality, especially if the data is added by someone that is new to OpenStreetMap. So for example, if the data is in buildings or roads, there are some standards that have been put by the people that are using OpenStreetMap or have been adding data to OpenStreetMap. So if someone is a beginner mapper and they add a building, they might not be following the let's say workflow or methodology that is usually being used. And so therefore at the end, the data might be not of that as much good quality as you want it to be. But the good thing is there is usually people who are validators that come in and look at the data that has been digitized or added to the map, and they validate it. And if there's anything that is wrong with the data, they make it better, or digitize it better. So yeah, that's the major disadvantage to data sharing or open data.
Great, thanks for highlighting data quality. Very important, especially in a data sharing context. Stefan, any additional thoughts on advantages, disadvantages, or reflection on what Ima just shared around data quality?
Yeah, no, I think, unpacking the question, what's the advantage? I think it's important to make a distinction between the societal value of data sharing and the business value of data sharing. And I think they obviously, anyway, are quite often different. I think it was already mentioned by Shreya what the societal value is, which is really about improving insight so that it can improve decision-making. But also, from my point of view, a real societal value is really dealing with power asymmetries as a result of data asymmetries. Meaning those that have data quite often have insight, as opposed to those that don't have data. And how do we actually spread the insight in a more distributed, equal, democratic fashion? And I think data sharing is a key tool, and data collaboratives is a key tool to deal with those kinds of data asymmetries that lead to power asymmetries in society. From the business case, meaning we have a tool which is called the 9 R's, or 9 value propositions for businesses, or anyway, in this case, we just mean any organizations that have data to share their data. And it ranges from reciprocity, i.e. I share data, or I provide access to my data, and then I get something in return. And that could be other data sets, right? So that you actually pool data, and as a result, the result is that you have more data than you actually would have as an individual organization. But it also, anyway, involves having access to researchers that you typically might not have in your organization. And so the value of your data becomes more rich. Now, obviously, massive risks attached to that, including disclosure and misuse of data, but also reputation risk, right? If especially for those organizations that are sharing data, if it starts becoming misused, or the rigor of the insight is not up to standard as a result, for instance, of poor data quality, then that might have reputation risk. And of course, that's what many corporations are fearing by providing their access to their data as well.
Excellent. Thank you for touching also on data misuse and privacy and some of the risks. In fact, as we talk about the enablers of responsible and impactful data sharing, so whether it's the operational or ethical or policy related, it would be great to just reflect on how do we address some of these risks. So there's a question in a chat window where Bassi highlights that in as much as data sharing can be economical for the organization, how do we ensure the safety of the shared data? So Caitlin, I want to turn to you and then Joseph to talk about some of the enablers and with this question in mind.
I think it's a great question, and really picking up on what Stefan was saying, which is so many of the challenges DataKind also encounters in trying to build data partnerships and to encourage data sharing. That the incentives are often misaligned to data sharing, and so an organization has to take risk. They have to think innovatively. They have to convince stakeholders to allow data sharing, and so at DataKind. We have found it helpful to provide standardized data sharing agreements, to provide a playbook. We have a DataKind playbook that I'll link in the chat of how to go through developing your data for good project and the key points of engagement with a partner organization to allow them feedback time, really a human-centered approach that enables co-creation and allows for a partner organization who is the data owner to weigh in, to truly give that subject matter expertise on what is being built and being assessed. I also just want to pick up on one of the challenges with data sharing is sensitive data that it is not easy to share, and this is something DataKind has really encountered in our work in frontline health systems. And I'll mention a couple of tools that we have been exploring as being incredibly useful. So there's a broad field of study called PETS, or privacy enhancing technologies. And this can range from setting up your secure data transfer environments to doing anonymization at various levels of sophistication to creating synthetic data. And synthetic data is a space that we have seen a lot of promise in the work that we're doing in frontline health systems, because it allows us to create realistic but not real data sets that allow for information sharing across organizations or across countries for us, it allows us to put tools out in the world with data that can be used to test that tool, demonstrate how it works, but not rely on any one organization's toolkit. So I would just say it's the kind of ways that we have seen effective in overcoming those challenges are in education, in templatization, and in pursuing the sort of cutting edge of privacy enhancing technology and being the ones who bring that to our stakeholders as a demonstration of an effective way to data share.
Great, thanks, Caitlin. If you can share that in chat window, that'd be great. So just to highlight for everyone, take a look at, or online, you can find a lot of resources related to synthetic data, which is one of the several privacy enhancing technologies that can help address some of the privacy risks, especially related to sensitive data. Joseph, what are you finding are key enablers at IFRC in your data collaborations?
Yeah, thanks, Leila. And actually, a lot of the enablers that were already mentioned in the previous discussion are resonating also in the work that we are doing in the humanitarian space, particularly around cash assistance. But maybe I just wanted to enhance a little bit, some of the discussions around incentives and data protection. So first on incentives, it's true, everyone is busy, and if the value is not clear from the partners to contribute their data, the collective benefit is very difficult to realize. Therefore, creating incentives is key, and I think we've mentioned that a few times now. But it's also true that the incentives could be different, or it could vary depending on partners. And so therefore, it's very important to really understand, in figuring out how to meaningfully share data, what are the drivers of the partners in contributing this data. In my previous example, in our Counting Cash initiative, for instance, we had members who saw that they were able to use the data to advocate more for donors. Or with donors, and they were very quick to contribute, with good quality data, while there were some members that really struggled, and that potentially because that particular priority that particular incentive was not priority for them. There are other things that would have been nicer to expand on before that specific incentive. On the topic of data protection and data responsibility, some may actually think that data protection policies and working on data sharing agreements particularly when sharing personal details of affected people, could be more of a barrier. Because it usually takes a long time to establish, and there's several different stakeholders that usually, are consulted with. But those that were able to invest time to address these, being able to do a risk assessment, being able to, foresee what could happen or what actions could be done when data is misused, as mentioned previously by Stefan. Being more proactive on these fronts, then creating templates for what data sharing could be that already embed, a lot of these data protection elements. Then we're not only ensuring that the data is shared efficiently, but we're also doing so responsibly. We're being more proactive in terms of addressing, the safety, and hopefully, get the benefits also monetary wise and others, but doing so in a responsible manner.
Thanks, Joseph, highlighting some of the data protection policies, but also the need for enforcement and also some of the incentives. Again, for those of you listening, if there are any other incentives that you found effective, feel free to add that in the chat window. Shreya, in the introduction, in your example, you mentioned peer-to-peer data sharing, and you talked about data ownership at the small farmholder level, farmer level, sorry. If you can talk about specific kind of tools or enablers that make that possible.
Sure, Leela. So I think just to start, I think when we talk about enablers, one is the technology stack, which is where you have a lot of the tools that I've mentioned, and I can share a little bit more about that. But getting actually the human stack right alongside the technology stack and making sure that they both actually support one another is what's important. And on the human stack side, it's a lot of the things that I think, Stefan, you mentioned, like, for example, getting the governance, getting the collaboratives, getting the incentives, as we've discussed already, between private sector governments, where there is a lot of fear around how the data will be used. And talking about the value of data, it is often monetizable data. So recognizing that as a business proposition for different organizations. So just wanted to highlight how getting the human stack right is important. From a tool standpoint, I think that there's a lot out there that's emerging, like for example, the privacy enhancing technologies. The two tools that we've developed are one around secure data sharing. So there's a difference between an application and a protocol, in that a protocol allows others to build their tools on top of a particular standard. And I see in the chat, Victoria has also asked about standards. So getting, for example, the protocols in which other organizations can actually use it to share data with one another directly. So FarmStack allows for peer-to-peer data sharing. So you don't have to share your data with a central authority in a central database, which allows for more control over exactly what data you're using, for how long, and for what time. So just wanted to highlight that there are tools like that. And then also, for example, tools like Data Wallet, which allow users themselves copies of their own data, which then they can directly share with others. And just to say that, of course, all of this is dependent on a certain amount of digital technology being accessible and available. And often the communities that we work with in the development world don't have access to smartphones. And that's when leveraging the human stack, where intermediaries who might have access, how can we ensure that they can, in creative ways, allow access to the most marginalized becomes really important.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing the technology piece and the tool. So we were talking about people, process, and technology. And then Ima, I want to come back to the people part specific to HOT. How do you enable community to participate in responsible, impactful data sharing? Like, what's the one thing that you think is important to have in place?
Thank you very much, Leila. Yeah, I think like I mentioned when I was giving the example of the project that we did, one thing that we have discovered is very important in all the projects that we do is the involvement of the community members, or more specifically, the local community members of that area. Because if, like I said, if I go to a place as an, let's say, expert, quote unquote, and I just want to collect data from that area, I may not and I will not be able to collect the exact accurate data that I want to collect. For example, I go to a place and maybe my project wants to collect water points. There are some areas with water points that are not, let's say visible, but the local community members that live in that area know exactly where exactly the local, the water points are located. So if I involve them in the data collection that I'm doing, then they're going to show me each and every water point that I want to collect. So one of the enablers I can say is one thing that is really crucial is the involvement of local community members in every, let's say, data collection that is being done. And this can, for example, in Tanzania, this has led to a creation of a local organization even, which I was a part of, Open Map Development Tanzania, which was formulated by university students that were involved in the Ramani Huria project, and then later continued involving the community members with the project, but also we formulated a local organization which continues working on different projects with different community members. And this not only provides us with accurate data, but it also builds the community members' knowledge in terms of like the digital tools that we use, let's say in terms of map creation, map reading, and all that. So it's let's say it's an enabler for both of us as, let's say, expert and the local community members as well.
Well said. It benefits the community, but also benefits the overall process, and the capacity building is certainly needed. I want to talk about what's kind of next in the near term. So we're talking about next 5 years. How do you see collaborative data sharing contributing to the development work? And how do we ensure that the benefits of data use and data sharing outweigh some of the costs and associated risks that we talk about here? Stefan, what are your thoughts on this?
Thanks, Leah. It's a big big question, and we don't have that much time, so I'm only going to highlight one. And I think is that moving forward, we're gonna also have to start focusing on how do we actually transform the insight generated into decisions and actions. Meaning you talked about what's the value, but the value of data is a two-step process, right? So it's from data to insight, and then from insight to action. And too often in the data collaborative space, we focus on from data to insight, and then we stop. And we actually do need to spend a lot more time on how do we actually go from data intelligence to decision intelligence in a legitimate and inclusive and participatory way, because otherwise the value is not going to be generated because it's just going to be insight without actually any improvement on the decisions and on how we actually deal with certain kinds of problems. And part of the challenge and the reason why it's quite often hard to translate insight into action is because we don't spend enough time on formulating the question in a participatory manner that then can immediately inform action if we have insight. And that's why, anyway, we have spent a lot of time also on advocating not just data literacy, but what we call question literacy, i.e. we need to actually really be able to formulate the questions that then subsequently can generate action through data at the beginning, and that will streamline actually uptake and action at the end. And I think that's one of the next, I would say, areas for improvement, in addition to, of course, still dealing with all the problems that we addressed today. But I think we do need to spend a lot more time on generating action from inside. And there's a whole range of things that we can do there.
Yeah, I love your emphasis on knowing what questions to ask, being central to really unlocking the value of data, whether it's in your own organization or shared in a collaborative. Joseph or Caitlin, any additional thoughts in terms of next 5 years, and how do we make sure that the benefits outweigh any costs and risks?
Yeah, maybe I could start. So in terms of the need to collaborate more on data, I think definitely it's going to increase more and more. I think we just have to. I mean, part of it is the digitalization push. But really, it's about this meaningful ways of doing things, meaningful data sharing as well. So our goal, for instance, on the humanitarian cash assistance is to scale up, but really it goes for any forms of humanitarian assistance, where it's not going to be about an individual organization benefiting anymore, but really impact towards the affected population. So I really like, what some of our other panelists have said around, data ownership, being able to, contribute on that level, because I think it's really, it's going to be shifting more, the benefits outside of what's in it for an organization, but rather what's in it for the population at large. And we had talked about one of the potential barriers before, which is around the culture of data sharing. And we have a tendency to hold on still, I think, to our own data, perhaps due to trust issues, perceived competition, stringent policies, or simply due to lack of understanding of the unrealized value of sharing. I would like to add responsibly to that. But I definitely see that this culture is changing. We're seeing, within the NGO communities and big international organizations, we have 14 INGOs coming together, creating this collaborative cash network, delivery network, where they are really looking at how do we lower down or reduce the barriers, in providing assistance to people, given that we are all in these similar areas. And data sharing is one of the topics that they're addressing. The UN Common Cash Statement as well, where 3 of the largest cash players and cash within the UN system have specifically invested on multilateral data sharing agreements, and they are improving these interoperabilities within their systems to be able to share that data. So things are definitely moving. Within the Red Cross Red Crescent movement, we're also working to have greater impacts via this meaningful and responsible data sharing to be able to reach our ambitions, especially as we move and use more of these digital solutions. And one effort that we're developing or have invested on is the IFRC's data playbook, where we have a link also in the resources page. So I have a good colleague, Heather, who's been spearheading this, with us. And we are using this to really increase the competencies around data literacy, because it's not just the information management people that benefits this, it's throughout all levels of the organization. And through small bits and pieces of exercises, best practices, how-tos, we're moving, a step better towards getting it right, from a data standpoint.
Great, thanks so much, Joseph. Caitlin, only briefly, because we need to go into the closing remarks.
Absolutely. I'll add to everything that folks have said and just say, in the next 5 years, I see considerable investment in this space. I dropped a number of links here, but there's been a real investment in the open source movement in the digital public goods and the classification as data as a digital public good, and organizations like the Lacuna Fund, which have been developed for the express purpose of building these high quality data sets. So I think that's a positive trend that I'd expect to continue in the next 5 years. Excellent. All right, to close out this really rich discussion, we can have a whole conference just dedicated to this. Quickly, either a call to action for the attendees or one key insight from this discussion that you think everyone should take forward and bring back to your organizations. So I will go with Shreya, Ima, Joseph, Caitlin, and Stefan. Brief, 20 seconds.
Sounds good. Thanks, Leela. Just to say that the technology stack is as important as the human stack. And if we can have the users control their own data and we as organizations supporting them in doing that, that would be a more equitable and wonderful world. So with that, I've forgotten who the next person was.
Ima and then Joseph. Quick.
Yeah, thank you very much. For me, I'll keep emphasizing that involving the community members in any data collection that you want to do in any project that you're doing is very crucial, as you'll get more accurate information that will be helpful in any humanitarian work that we're doing. Thank you.
And for me, it's talking to these data experts. I think, you know, we've had really good examples today. And if you are still unsure about data sharing, because we saw in the poll that there were some people that may not have had good experience with data sharing, it could be because of your own culture or limited understanding. So talk and get inspired by these wonderful data experts that we have here.
Caitlin.
I'll just echo that, and to add, thinking about sustainability, sustainability of the data ecosystem that we create, and the obligations we have to be responsible with others' data. Over to you, Stefan.
I mean, 20 seconds for an academic is very hard, Leila, but I just echo everything that was said, but also I think part of the discussion today illustrated that there are a lot of variables involved in determining data collaboration and data sharing, which means that we actually do need to invest in a new profession within data holders and within those that seek data, which we call data stewards, that really can try to develop those data collaborations in a way that is best and fit for purpose. And that's really a call for action to establish those data stewards across organizations that can actually accelerate, which relates to the human stack, because that's the human infrastructure that we are still missing as well.
Great. Well, so as you heard, data sharing is central to our work and to meeting the needs of the people in need. And we need to invest in people, process, and technology. There's some great examples in this session, a lot more on the Pathable page, and hopefully we'll have a lot more discussions focused on data sharing in the future. Thank you to this excellent lineup of panelists, experts. So Stefan, Shreya, Ima, Joseph, and Caitlin, and thank you so everyone for engaged discussion in the chat window, and see you in the next session.